Okay, I think we have everything set up. You want to just go ahead and get started?
Let's do it. I've got 3 o'clock, so.
Okay, good. Well, thank you everyone for joining our presentation on making the choice and how to evaluate and select the best ops solutions for your organization and for your team. To give you a little background on who we are and why you care what we say, I am Tanya Vila. I'm co-founder and general counsel for Big Fork Technology. And I am so passionate about legal ops and providing solutions for that I actually quit my day job to help build a solution that would work for me. And over the past couple of years, we've been able to get something that I'm pretty proud of. But along the way, over the last 15, 16, however many years, I have gone through the selection process of trying to find the correct solution, the correct process, solution, and technology that works for my internal teams, whether they be legal, finance, or operational. And I learned quite a bit along the way. So over those years, I implemented legal ops specifically at least 5 or 6 different companies. So I hope to share some of those lessons with you today. Now, along with me today is Bryce on the board. She is our operations manager here at Big Fork. And while she isn't legal, she is very process-oriented, which we love about her, and brings an entirely different viewpoint in the selections of operations, software and solutions as a whole through non-legal eyes, which I think is very critical for this conversation. We're lucky to have her at Allo, or at Big Fork. We found her, I was introduced to her at least, after we implemented Allo at her previous company. And so I'm very pleased to have her join our team. So why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, like Tanya said, I joined Big Fork after I worked with Allo. I selected and implemented and used it for 1.5 years at my previous employer. And we used it throughout our organization in our legal operations and operationally throughout the organization. And it was a really fabulous tool, and I really enjoyed using it. And I have a background in project management and communications and operations, and that has given me a lot of opportunity to work with departments throughout an organization, see what they need, see how I can help meet those needs and increase their operational capacity to be productive, to be efficient. And Allo really empowered me to do that in my organization. So I was excited when I was able to join Allo and continue to help other organizations meet their goals across all of their teams. And so it's been a great journey here at Big Fork, and I have selected a lot of different softwares and a lot of different kinds of softwares for a lot of different departments over the course of my career. And in this webinar, we'll kind of cover what I've learned along the way.
Thank you. So let's go ahead and jump into those lessons learned. For any software decision, well, for any decision in life, there are steps that you have to take in choosing what step you're going to take, or a process you have to take to choose what steps you're going to take. And that's the same for this process as well. The biggest challenge here that we find, that I found personally, but also that we find in our customers, is that analysis paralysis. There are so many solutions on the market today, and there's not a whole lot of time in between doing your actual day job to figure out what's right for you. So we're going to help you break down the steps to narrow that process and streamline it so that hopefully you can get to a decision faster and an implementation faster, and take less time away from the day job that they actually pay you to do. So it really breaks down to 3 steps. 1, you've got to get your foundation right. Know what your requirements are. The whys, the whats, the hows. Those are the things that you need to have set up first. Then you're going to go and get a look at the product and solution. From my experience, don't trust a solution that doesn't exist yet. I know that there are plenty of people in Silicon Valley who have made a lot of money selling stuff that wasn't done quite yet, but unless you want to be on a year, 2 year long implementation schedule, you want to actually see the product. And then you need to actually make a decision. And we find that this is actually the longest step in the process for a lot of people. So hopefully we'll be able to help break those steps down for you. So step 1, know your requirements. Now this one sounds easy, but it's actually pretty hard because it's such a broad concept that you really need to narrow it down. Now I find that it's easiest to actually draw out a flow chart. And you'll see one on your screen that we use to implement a workflow for a customer. Just to highlight how your current process works. And the best way from going there is sort of circle what works, what doesn't work, what problems you need to find. And make sure that as you're finding those problems that you want to solve, that you prioritize them. Now, nothing out there is going to have everything. Believe me, we've come pretty close because I send every new feature I can think of over to my dev team. And because I'm a co-founder, they have to try to build it, which is awesome for me and for our customers eventually. But there's still going to be things that are just not practical or financially within reach given your current budget. So you need to prioritize what your requirements are. Now, Bryson, I know you've gone through the selection process for numerous different software types over the years. What tips would you have on creating your requirements?
Yeah, so I kind of have 2 main things that I start with. First of all, I'm a big proponent of making sure you've heard from everyone that is a stakeholder or might consider themselves to be a stakeholder in this software. So assessing who wants to have a voice, who's particularly passionate and might want to be brought into the evaluation process. Let them tell you what pain points they have in their workflow. It might not even have anything to do with software, but hearing them out and letting them know that you're advocating for them while you're selecting a software is really important, especially when it comes to adoption down the line and getting people's buy-in. So generating this buy-in and making sure you've heard from everyone is very important. It also opens your eyes to making sure that you aren't missing something because you have kind of a tunnel vision for what will impact your workflow. So if you're thinking about who's going to be using it, how they're going to be using it, and then asking them what are your pain points, that's going to be a major part. The second part is your software is an investment. It's just like an employee. And so while you're looking through your processes and you're trying to figure out what problems are there in my organization that my software needs to solve, it may be helpful to start with writing a job description for your software. Figure out what your essential functions are. Figure out what the KSAs or what your ideal candidate looks like. Just like an employee, you're not going to find exactly what you're looking for every single time, but you can figure out what accommodations need to be made, what can be covered by other areas, and that helps. That's going to help you then break down into specific features that you need. But as you're evaluating your softwares, you can always go back to that description and say, does this meet my essential function? The other piece of it is if you're writing down your processes, in several of the organizations that I've worked in, there's not actually a defined process for how things work. And so if that is you, first of all, that's okay. It's all right to not have a defined process at this time, but you can think about what are my pain points? Where do things often go wrong? And that's where you want your software to support you.
Those are great tips. And just to add on to that last one of where do my things go wrong, I would say you want to think holistically on how those work, especially as you're defining your cross-functional requirements. I can remember one implementation that I did for an organization where our financial team was very concerned about being able to get reporting based off of due dates on payments or invoicing due dates. And so we made it a question for every implementation, every demo that we did. And we selected a software that showed us a great report that was very easy to run based off of the due dates. And it wasn't until after we spent about 30 grand in 2 months implementing it that we realized I couldn't run any other reports on it. That was the only reporting that we asked about because the assumption was made if you can do reports on due dates, you can make other reports available, but they didn't actually index things like the contract value. So I couldn't run reports on the total value of contracts for the quarter, or the how long it's at in a specific status. So I couldn't run SLA reports. And it was really frustrating for me to, after the fact, and I was stuck with the product, to not have that minimum requirement met because I didn't ask the question holistically. I asked it too specifically.
That's a really good point. You have to get in the weeds. As much as it's really nice to think about your high level, as you go through each feature, it's very important to get in the weeds. And that's why I use a feature grid where I can take notes on what is possible and what is not possible. And I keep it pretty compact so that I can compare within my demos, which we'll get to very shortly, so that I can make sure as I go through demos, I'm going to come up with more questions and I can ask them to the next people every single time. We do have one quick question that I want to address from our audience. It said, Ricelyn, in your previous roles, who did you find the most and least enthusiastic about being part of the selection process? And what I found was our leadership wanted to say, here's what we need, if they had anything that they needed. Sometimes they just wanted to make sure that we were empowered, so they just asked us to tell us what they needed. What I found was the folks in the mid roles and the lower roles who were going to be deeply impacted by it tended to be really nervous about what change was coming down the pike. And so they wanted to know that they were being fully heard and that they were going to be a part of that. And some people are just a little bit more passionate, they're a little bit more chatty, they want to feel really involved, and those folks are typically pretty easy to identify. But from that lower range of employees who are going to be in the product the most and be most deeply impacted, they were the ones that were most concerned about how their workflow was going to be impacted. Was it actually going to help them, or was it just going to be an extra step in their workflow? Great question. Thank you.
Yeah, and one that leads into our next segment on actual, how do you find out how their workflow is going to be impacted? And really the best way to do that is first start with the company's website. Do they have images of the product on the site? Do they have videos or YouTube channel that show the product in use? Those can be very helpful. It's always been a frustration of mine when trying to select a new product or service of any kind, to go to a website and the only way to get information was to contact us. And in that case, you might end up wasting both parties' time if it's not a solution that meets your requirements. So start with the website and see what you can find out from there. And then from that, schedule a demo. I think that being able to ask the specific questions about how a workflow in particular would work can help you give peace of mind to those employees who are worried about, you're just adding another level of complexity to my job, and being able to see it in process can answer a lot of questions. So we do have some tips and tricks for making the most of your demos and your trials. So I would start with making your list of what you have to have. And then what is your use case? And almost as important as what is your use case, what isn't your use case? If you let them, salespeople will spend an hour and a half on the phone selling you every bell and whistle that is available in their software. If you only need a contract repository, or if you only need something to manage your PTO process, it's a waste of both your time because the product's not working for you. So definitely be aware of communicating to the person who's giving you the demo what it is you want to see and what it is that you don't want to see. And Brian, you've been through quite a few demos on both sides of the table now. So what tips do you have to make the most of your demo time?
Yeah, other than being very clear about what you want them to show you, I tend to be very clear about my goals. What are these essential functions? What problem do I need this to solve? Where is that pain point in my organization and in my workflow? Because not every software will approach it from the same way. So if I narrow that down to a feature, I may actually be removing a viable candidate from the list because they might offer a workaround. And so I always will say, I will always start with, here's my problem, can you solve it? And let them tell me how they're going to solve it. If they give me some answer that doesn't necessarily solve the problem, I'll clarify, or I'll then move on to my specific features. I let them show me around the solution. If there's a feature that I'm not interested in, I let them know so that we can just move right on past it. And I take my feature grid with me. I use this grid in a quantitative and a qualitative space. So I score each of their products or their features afterward on whether or not they have it, whether it meets my needs, and then I take notes on why it meets the needs, what it doesn't meet, or if there's any particular nuance that makes it interesting. And then I also have in my grid a cost for that feature. What a lot of systems will do is they'll start with a very low user cost. And then each feature might be an additional module. It might be an added cost per month or per user to actually utilize that feature. And so I make sure that I'm very, very diligent asking about costs. I tend to be additionally diligent with companies who have websites that are not transparent because I feel like I need to ask more questions. And I've been burned a couple times on those because there's a lot of extra stuff that you may not know about. So on those demos, I have a cost column for each of my features, just in case there is a cost associated with it, because that's how they're able to make additional money after a low user cost. So be aware of that. And then question all of your reporting. Question all of the field opportunities. Can I create certain kinds of fields? Can I create reports off of those fields? Can they be interdependent? Those are really important things that you're going to need to know because that will ultimately impact whether or not this meets your needs. The other piece that you should be asking about is, can I make the changes myself and how easy is it to do that? Because if you have to contact them every single time you want to run a report, I had a CRM that I had to contact support every single time I wanted a report, and it took 14 days. And that was an inherited system, but it was one of the things that I needed to replace, and it was one of the things that actually drove us away from that. So make sure that you don't enter into one of those contracts where you feel like you have to bail as soon as you get it implemented. And then every salesperson is not a product expert. And so give them room to get back to you, because what you might need to do is create a list of things that they need to follow up with you on. That holds your salesperson accountable, and it makes sure that you get the information you need. So if there's any piece of your demo that you're not satisfied with their answer afterward, send them an email and ask them to get back to you with very specific details on the things that you need to know.
Great tips. And they follow over into getting a trial as well. So I have asked for trials, and our customers routinely ask for trials, and we have a couple of lessons learned on that as well. My first lesson there is, if you don't have time to do a trial, don't waste your time trying to set one up. Generally speaking, I have personally asked for trials, gotten 30 days to play with a solution, logged in once for about 10 minutes, and still never actually got around to the solution. And it's really hard if you don't have the time to dig into it to actually have the trial help you in any way. If you do get to go into the trial and you do have time to it, make note of the features that you like or don't like, and follow up with questions on what can be changed, if anything, and what the cost of doing that is. And also what is included that's in the trial, because a lot of times the software trial version will be their fully souped up version. And you don't find out until after you signed up that, well, the level you signed up for doesn't have these 3 things that were the key features that you liked in the trial. So I would definitely check on that as you're doing the trial. and then ask about what isn't included in the trial. So for example, in Allo, our trials don't include a DocuSign integration, even though that is a standard feature to all of our customer implementations. And that's for a practical reason, because the number of notifications and emails and the cost of those envelopes for the way DocuSign is set up gets to be an administrative burden. And so for both the customer and for Big Fork, so we don't have the DocuSign integration in the trial, but it is a standard feature on all of our implementations. So if you think you heard something in the demo or on the website and you're not seeing it in the trial, ask the questions on that as well. Right? Do you have any additional tips for testing trials?
For trials, only that my only experience that I have thought of as beneficial from a trial is knowing what the user interface is going to feel like. As far as features, etc., there's so little way of knowing, especially if it's a customizable program, what is actually going to work and not going to work for you. That is really just a useful feature in the UI and how they communicate with you about the trial. But I often have felt like trials were not a good use of my time, and that I didn't really use them as a determinant in my decision-making process. We have one more question, and you can tackle it or I'm happy to. It's, what if you really don't know what you need? So you don't have defined processes and you've never used a legal operations software. How do you navigate that evaluation process? What are your first steps, I guess?
Yeah, so there's a couple of different things you can do. One is the wisdom of the crowd. So one of the good things about being an in-house attorney or in-house legal ops person is that there's a lot of groups out there that have the same problems that you do. It's a contract essentially is a contract. You may have a slightly different approval process, but you're going to have an approval process. You might have a slightly different risk tolerance on negotiating certain clauses, but you're going to have clauses. So being able to talk to your colleagues about that, and there are several organizations. I'm personally a fan of Association for Corporate Counsel, ACC. Not affiliated in any way with Big Fork, but I've gotten a lot of feedback from colleagues online from them. Your internal personal network and the people you went to law school with, or the friends that you have lunch with, and as you're complaining about that salesperson, ask them how they manage their contracts. And that's a good place to start. The next step would be, do some Google searches, use the references you received or what you can find online, and call and ask the salesperson, what are you seeing your customers do? How do other customers handle this? And every implementation that we've done at Big Fork, there is a part of it, a phase of it, where we go through and as we're building out the processes for the customer, we talk about, I've seen other customers set it up this way, or this worked for one customer, but we had to change it for another because of this situation. What situation do you have? So leverage the expertise of your implementation team or even your sales team before you get to the implementation process, because this is what we do. Legal ops is generally, or ops is, depending on what you're talking to me or Bryson, it's our life. So we will talk about it for hours if you want to. And if you're not comfortable with talking to a stranger at the end of this presentation, you'll have my contact information. Go ahead and shoot me an email or give me a call. I'll be happy to talk about it with you.
I would say, just to add to that, if I don't know what I need, if I don't know the features and I'm not sure of what my next steps are, I do reach out and I start my sales conversations with, this is what I find annoying about my work. And if they can help me come up with some solutions, it at least gets me to a point where I understand what features exist within that system. I might not even be annoyed with my work. I might be annoyed with the way that I am getting information from another department. And so taking the time to say, this is a pain point and it's troublesome, allowing them to actually explain what their solution would be and how it resolves it, and asking questions about the features and the utilization of those is really, really helpful when you begin that sales process. So you might not go into the demo going, do you have these features, but how can you resolve this for me? And then you can start building your list, and you can start searching, Google searching for those features and different items like it. But feel free to start somewhere, and feel free to start a conversation, whether it's with a salesperson or in a group. That'll help you out a lot.
Yeah, and that holds true, I think, for every customer that we've implemented has started with a single pain point. And they expand the functionality from there. But we've had, one customer came to us because because of our DocuSign integration, having it automatically add back to the repository without them having to do another step. One came to us specifically because of the Outlook integration, because they spend their life on their phone on Outlook, or the mobile version of Outlook, and needed to be able to track what was going on and assign work through something other than email. And so being able to actually from email assign to her team was the critical piece. And the latest one we implemented, she was frustrated with reformatting documents out of their current management system, did everything through a portal, but in order for her to send it for approvals and signatures, she had to pull it out of the portal, which required her to reformat documents. Seems like a silly thing and not really illegal in nature. She had a tool that worked for their process overall, but she found she spent a lot of time just reformatting from the Google format to a Word format. And so she switched because of that. That single pain point was what caused her to start looking. So it is totally legitimate to start with a single pain point if it's causing you that much concern or stress, that you might find additional functionality, but starting at that pain point is very helpful. Now, once you've made all your exhaustive list and you've done all of the millions of demos that you have time to do, and you've had as many internal conversations as you can count, you still have to come to a decision. And this is where things slow down quite a bit in the decision-making process, and where you get from, I need something, to I've got something. This is where we see the biggest holdup. So some of the tips we have to help speed this along is, other than sort of just making a pros cons list for each option, compare apples to apples. And by that I mean, almost every contract management solution will have a version control system of some sort. What do their version control systems look like? So compare that. Compare if you've got, like Allo has, where you've got the Outlook integration, the DocuSign integration included in it. Is that a added module to another solution? Think about the full scope of functionality compared to, with Allo you can do, and I know we're using Allo a lot, but that's because that's where my expertise is. With Allo you can do matter management, contract management. I manage my team's PTO on it. I manage my team's CLEs on it. So I can do a lot more than just a standard contract management tool. So when I'm comparing, if I'm comparing solutions, I need to say, what is the full functionality? In order to get everything that I get with this one solution, I have to have these two solutions to make up that functionality. So compare the two in relation to the one. Don't do single, this contract and this matter management compared to this holistic solution. And then I think costs are another easy way of sort of delineating the ranks between what's doable, what's not doable. But again, compare apples to apples on that as well. The startup cost versus the ongoing cost. What does it cost to get you implemented? There's an implementation cost for most solutions out there, and they vary widely from, you know, a couple of $1,000s to $100,000, $200,000. And what's included in that startup, the startup costs. A lot of an easy way for software providers to get you is nickel and diming the additional features. Not only are you paying an annual fee for them, but you're paying an additional setup fee for them. So knowing and comparing apples to apples on the total cost of ownership for starting up that first year, and then the total cost for the second year, because it should fall. Your first year is going to be your investment. Your second year should fall from your first year because you shouldn't have ongoing implementation costs. Next thing to consider is the customer support. And I think a lot of evaluations end at comparing the costs and features, and that's the mistake. And that's where you end up keeping cycling through the process of trying to make the decision because you don't actually have enough data to be able to make a decision. So once you've got, here's my top 5 features that I need to have, I want to have, and that I like, and here are the top 5 solutions that our costs are comparable or within the range that we can afford. The next step is, what does the customer service look like? Is the customer support completely outsourced? There are some competitors who do that. Do you pay a fee to have someone at your beck and call? What's included in that? You know, is there an annual maintenance fee? Is there a customer support number that you can call? Are they available by, you know, at Big Fork, we're available by Slack, email, or phone. Can you get that sort of support? How readily can you get it? Is it available to all of your employees who are using the system, or just the administrator or the account holder? And what's included in that support? And I think Bryson had mentioned it in her intro example, and it brought to mind one example where I got caught by this one, and the solution was great. It integrated into Salesforce exactly the way I wanted it to. The workflows worked great, but I couldn't change them. So every time I wanted to change a template in a workflow, and I mean just change a capital T or change I had to get professional services to help, because it wasn't something I could do myself, and it wasn't something that customer support, as it was defined, did for me. So I was paying $150 an hour to add periods and change around clauses in a contract, just for the technical support. At the end of that year, my second year of having that particular software solution, I actually paid more for professional support than I paid for the licensing fees. And so understanding that, what that customer support looks like and how it's going to impact your overall cost of ownership, is important to take into consideration with your decision analysis, and can be the factor that makes the difference. I'll let Bryson talk about implementation, because I think she's got some better stories than I do as far as the implementations that go well and don't go so well.
Yes. To go back a little bit, clarity comes for me when I write down an argument. So I can compare my lists, I can compare my apples to apples. When something rises to the top, writing down a paragraph of argument of why this is the best fit, even if you don't think it is. Argue for it. Argue for why this is the best fit. Argue for what doesn't work. Argue for the accommodations that need to be made and what they would cost. And a lot of clarity will come for me in that process of just writing it out in a less quantitative format. So that is one of the things that I think helps, and it helps in your argument to your leadership, which we're going to have a webinar on how to sell this to your internal leadership next month. And it also helps in articulating your implementation and articulating why you selected something if you get pushback during your implementation. So implementation is fun, and it is really dependent on a couple things. It's dependent on like getting your buy-in and selling it internally and making sure that everybody's on board. And it's really important, the other leg of implementation that's very critical is training. That's what's going to happen on the inside of your organization. The implementation with your tool is also a critically important piece. So I've been through implementations where it's 6 months of meeting weekly where I'm trained on a piece of it, and then I have to go build it out before my next week. And it's just 6 months of them training me, and then I have to go build it, and then I show them what I built, and then they train me the next piece, and then I build it. And I've been through implementations where I am given 7 hours worth of webinars, and they wave at me and tell me that I can contact support between the hours of 8 and 3 in some random time zone, and that's all I get. And so I've also been through some really great implementations where there is consulting, and consulting is a really important piece of implementation if you are customizing something and if you're building a workflow. So ask if there's ask if there's consulting, ask if there's training included, ask if there is ask what their implementation fee is and what it includes. Do I get workflows? Do you set up reports for me? Do you set up the whole system? Is it outsourced? Is some third party taking care of your implementation process? I know Tanya had an experience where a third party took care of her implementation process and they weren't experts in the software. So make sure that they're doing it in-house, or that their in-house folks are included in the process of your implementation, and then really consider what it's going to look like after they're finished. So I missed, you got to know how long it takes, because if it's 6 months of you setting it up yourself, you're paying user fees for a long time of not utilizing the software. If it's 3 weeks and they're building it for you, that's a pretty good deal. So know what it's going to cost, know what it's going to take to do it from you, and then figure out what the support is after that implementation. So are they going to continue helping you? Is there training included? Can I purchase additional training? Because if you have somebody in your organization that is going to sit down with a new tool and they're going to play with it until they figure out how it works, you have hired a unicorn and you should hold on to them forever. But most people are not going to do that. And so they need to be guided and they need to be breadcrumbed to success. And if you're approaching an implementation and you're not making training a cornerstone of that implementation for at least an admin who will in-house train all of your current folks and anybody who comes in later, because you will have new staff and you have to have a training plan for those new staff. If that's not a cornerstone of your implementation process in some way, it's really important to know if you're supported at all, if you can purchase more training, or if it's just like waving at you as you float away on your new little boat and it's terrifying. It impacts your adoption pretty significantly.
Yeah, I think that's great. And that actually does fit into how do you determine what the best fit is. Mm-hmm. I think you have to take all of those things into consideration to determine your best fit. I personally take them and rank them, and there's a combination of factors and I go back to my pre-law school procurement days when I worked in the procurement team, and I have a vendor scorecard that I sort of use to evaluate the different software solutions or the different operation solutions that I'm looking at. And everything, you get a check mark for a feature, but more than that, you get how well does that feature meet what I need? Is it an A through F ranking? And then average those rankings out for the total overall functionality. So once you've ranked your features and then you've ranked how the solutions fit in your features and you've matched your budget, you've got your decision there. And that it should be a very quick criteria. So it should be a process that ideally would take less than 2 weeks from the time of your very last demo. Longer than that, and you start getting into the what ifs, you start forgetting the features, you start forgetting how you felt about the features or how well you liked them or how exactly it worked, and you start losing that. And then you have to get back into the cycle doing another demo or doing a follow-up conversation, and it extends your time longer and longer and longer. And at least my experience has been, the longer it takes to implement something, somehow my budget goes away. It never gets bigger, it always goes away. So from the time I get sort of the go ahead to go look and find something, I want to make that process as short as possible. And this is one of those steps that you can do in an afternoon. It should not take weeks to do it. Now, once you've made your decision, then you have to sell it internally, which is a whole nother webinar, as Bryson mentioned, and we will be going over that next month with our CFO and some other decision makers. But generally, I'll give you the crib notes on that. It's make the case that you're saving money somewhere. It is always the best way of selling it in-house. And your salesperson on your solution side should be able to help you make that case. That's the overall sort of process. And along the way, we've learned some insights into how the best solution selection and evaluation and decision and implementation process goes. So we're going to leave you with a few little insights and lessons learned. Now, for my part, I have 3 lessons that I've learned over the more than a decade I've been doing this. And these apply regardless of the context, where you're doing legal ops, financial ops, HRIS systems, PEOs, anything that you're evaluating as an operations solution. You have to think about adoption. Really doesn't matter if it's the best thing since sliced bread. If it requires people to add additional work to their workload, they will not adopt it. It will sit there. You will have a very expensive piece of software that collects dust. So you need to think about, how can it make life easier for the people who are going to be forced to use it. That's why there's so much unrest on those lower level employees who are going to be in it day to day, because they've seen too many times where software has been implemented and all it does is, now I have one more step to do in my process. So think about adoption as you're doing this. And as long as you're making life easier for some subset, at least, of the group involved, it's okay if it makes life a little bit more difficult for other groups. And for this example, I like to use my favorite group of corporate employees, the salespeople. We as corporate lawyers do a lot to make their lives easy, to the point that in some companies it is ridiculous. And in doing that, we end up making our internal legal teams' lives a lot harder by asking them to do all kinds of tracking, reporting, in addition to the job of actually reviewing and negotiating contracts. So a legal ops system helps make the lawyer's lives easier. At the end of the day, it gets the salespeople the information that they want to have. It just might take them a different step than sending an email request or asking the lawyers to chase down the information for them. So it might make the salesperson's job just a little bit harder because they have to go to a web portal instead of throwing something over Slack. Or they might actually have to fill out a form that has required fields instead of saying, here's the contract for a customer, and I'm not going to tell you the customer name. You can figure that all out on yourself. So when I say adoption, you really need to think about the people's lives that it's meant to make easier, not necessarily the entire group as a whole. It's okay to make life a little bit harder for some subgroups. The next thing is baby steps. If you have a file room full of paper contracts that are still being updated, filed, and 2 wet ink signatures that are notarized, going from that to AI contract analysis is not going to happen in a day. And don't expect it to. You're not going to be able to get the buy-in. You're not going to be able to get the adoption. And it will take forever to do that, just because there's steps that have to happen in between. You have to be able to digitalize your contracts. You have to be able to automate some of your processes. You have to be able to get a clause library. You have to be able to build a playbook off your clause library before you can even start talking about AI. And then you have to build the rules associated with AI. So as cool as it sounds, so we're going to get an AI solution. If you are starting from the Stone Age, don't try to go there. Take your baby steps. At that point, a repository is a step up. A general contract management system is great. We have a lot of users who start with Allo and they start with one section. Like they start just using contracts. And then they expand from contracts to corporate work and then to employment matters and then to litigation. And they expand from the one module. The most success we've seen in both adoption and actual increases in efficiency and productivity are the customers who do it that way, who take the baby steps and who say, I want this for my organization, and I'm going to start using it in little ways in my organization and expand from there. And then I can't get enough the post-sale customer support. If you're not getting a response after you close the sale, if your salesperson has not handed you off to an account manager or to somebody who can answer your questions and help you along with the implementation process, someone who you can escalate to if the implementation process isn't working, you are going to take a lot more of your time and resources to try to get a basic function out of that. So that's those are my key lessons learned. Bryson, what's your lessons?
Yeah, I'll go through these somewhat quickly because we have a number of questions that I want to make sure we get to. And if you have any further questions, please feel free to drop them in our Q&A right now, and we'll get to them by the end. So my lessons learned are know your stakeholders and generate your buy-in early. This is somewhat the same, but it's important to differentiate them. You need to know who is going to buy in based on you listening to them and you including them. And then you need to know who needs to speak into your software. I went through one selection process where I, with a group of leadership, identified folks from a variety of places who had information on where the pain points within their department were. And over the course of my process, there were folks within our organization who wanted to be part of that process. And our best option was to include them. And so what should have been a 6 to 8 week process became a 7-month evaluation process because we had to keep onboarding people and getting them in. So if there is a way to identify who those particularly passionate people are going to be and who really, really wants to speak into this early, it's going to make your life so much easier in the long run. And it's going to help your buy-in, and it's going to help your adoption, and it's going to help your implementation. And so kind of CYA on the front end on making sure that you know who your stakeholders are and that you're generating that buy-in as they're hearing about it. If there's whispers going around and they're not included, you're going to find somebody who's upset about it. When you're going through your demos, question every cost. If you follow up via email and you ask about a functionality, question every cost. Make sure that you are constantly asking about, does this integration come out of the box, or do I have to pay for it? Is it an ongoing payment? Do I have to have a user profile for every single person that's going to interact with both sides of the system? So we'll use Allo and Salesforce as an example. If I have people interacting with Salesforce from Allo, do I need one integrated profile in Salesforce and everybody in Allo can talk to Salesforce, or does every single person need a Salesforce login? Because that's going to impact the cost of your software significantly, and you may just not know that until it's late. So every time you have an integration, question the cost of the users, question the cost of the integration. Is it ongoing? Is it one time? You'll want to know all of these things up front. And then invest in your training. If there's one wonderful piece of advice that I can give you, it's to invest in your training. At minimum, you need to invest in an expert within your organization. It will cost less to train one person than it will to train many people, but that person should be responsible for holding office hours or hosting small group trainings. In one system, I trained over 300 people personally in our rollout of a CRM, and it was an exhausting process. And I trained, I think, 10 trainers, and they then trained a bunch of people after me. But that first 300 was 100% me just grinding it out and meeting one-on-one, meeting in small groups, whatever these people needed to understand. It was a very, very long process, and it was multiple times with every person because they had to understand the various functionalities, and you can't always get that in an hour. So invest in your training, let your vendor support you in that training if possible, and see if they have video tutorials or webinars that your folks can go to so that it takes some of the burden off of your internal team in training a new person or training somebody who's just not getting it.
Great tips. You want to go to your questions?
Yes, so we have I think 3 questions that we have yet to answer. So the first is, do we at Big Fork have any white papers or blog articles to read about how to start the process of defining needs?
I want to say yes, because I do recall writing one at one point. But I'll tell you what, we are, as part of the registration, we are going to send you a copy of the evaluation checklist that Bryson uses and the scorecard that I use. And so you'll be getting those materials. We'll also send you a copy of that blog post if I can dig it out of the dust balls.
And you can always contact us and let us know what you need help with, and we will point you in the right direction.
Absolutely.
Another question, does tying into a CRM help? We have Salesforce. Is this normally something that can help with a matter management system?
Absolutely. So one of my favorite integrations that I've done on any of the solutions, my top 2 is actually DocuSign and Salesforce. And that's because generally you're going to generate contracts. The majority of contracts that you're going to be generating is from Salesforce if you're an organization that has a lot of sales involved, and generally those are the organizations that have the majority of types of contracts. So that it is very helpful to have that. Like Bryson said, as far as questioning cost, that is something to question. What does the Salesforce integration look like? What is the functionality available in it? And what is the cost associated with it? At Allo, we do a one-time implementation fee, and that's varies from customer to customer because Salesforce's API does have some variables in it, and depending on what type of interaction you want to have, it's very customizable, and depending on what type of interaction you want to have, it may be a simple one-day project or it may be a 6-week project. So it really sort of depends on the implementation. I would be wary of anyone who says we've got Salesforce integration is built in, because there's no customization there. So unless you have a very standard process with your salespeople, don't expect to be able to cheaply change that. It will cost a lot more to do a customization on that type of implementation. But I found that it has been a lifesaver when you're dealing with a large sales team to be able to have them submit contract requests directly from what the tool they're working in, which is Salesforce, and have their updates be sent back to that tool so they can see what the status is. It reduces the number of calls that you get, Slack messages, emails, where's my matter at, if they can see it's pending external review, or they can see that it's pending signature. Especially if you tie that with the signature policy so they know whose signature is pending, then they start bothering the person who's supposed to be signing it and not you at all, which saves a ton of time. At one company that I integrated my CRM with my CLM at when I integrated Salesforce with it, I think we saved on average about 10 hours a week for my team on just answering where is the status of that, because they could go look for it. So it took a while for the salespeople to get used to, oh, it's this line item on the opportunity and the related section. But they once they were trained on it, they really appreciated it. It also helped us turn contracts faster because we were able to require information. You couldn't submit the contract request from Salesforce unless you had all of the required fields. So I wasn't spending time going back to Salesforce and saying, okay, what's this opportunity for? What's the product that they're buying? What's the cost that we've sold it to them for? What's the company name? What state are they in? You know, those sort of general things that we as lawyers aren't really adding value if we're just plugging into a template, but takes up several hours a week or hours in a month just tracking down that information. And by requiring it from the intake process, whether that is through your integration with the CRM or through an intake tool like we have at Allo, it really reduces the amount of time that your legal team is spending being the administrative team. Can you tell I'm a little passionate about that one?
Very, very passionate. We have one more question. Do you have any advice on cloud versus on-premises when doing the evaluation process?
Yeah, so it really depends on your organization structure and security requirements, although I will say that the world is moving to cloud. So if you're not there yet, you will be. I think this COVID environment has really taught us that the future is the cloud, and having something on a cloud-based system that is managed by experts that can make sure that your uptimes are guaranteed and that your response times and your servers are properly maintained and the applications are properly managed really has been helpful for teams that used to work in an office and now are working, you know, in sometimes different states now as they've scattered to this remote work environment. And the cloud has made that easier all the way across the board. I would say you do want to make sure that you check the terms and services of anything that is hosted in the cloud to make sure that they do have some protections as far as your data goes, that they're not, I know there was one cloud terms of service that I read that they disclaimed in their terms of service that they needed to, or that you couldn't put confidential information in their cloud application, which sort of defeated the purpose of the cloud application. So make sure that you're checking the terms for those sort of random things. But overall, I'd say if you can go to the cloud, that's the wave of the future. On-prem is always going to be slightly more expensive. It's going to be more cumbersome because you're going to have to do the maintenance on it, or you're going to have to pay for a maintenance contract on it. And ultimately, within the next 5 years, you're going to be moving off of it to something that is on the cloud.
Thank you.
So
that
I think
wraps up our questions.
Great. Well, if there are any more questions, please feel free to reach out to either myself or Bryceland. Our email information is there up on the screen. Like we said, we will send you the evaluation checklist and the scorecard to whatever the email is that you register for the webinar with. But if there's, if you'd like us to send it somewhere else, just shoot one of us an email and we'll send it there as well. And we're always here. So if you have any questions with either our experiences or what our customers are seeing, what we're seeing from our customers as they go through their selection process, feel free to reach out to us.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Yes, thank you. I can't turn it off.
I will do that.
Thank you.